We will continue to protest in the same spirit of love and nonviolence and passive resistance. Now, I might say that there is no bitterness on my part, and certainly no bitterness on the part of the more than 40,000 Negro citizens of Montgomery.
Well, whenever you are up against an enemy that's more heavily armed than you and with superior arms, the only way to defeat him is with guerrilla warfare. And if the oppressed people in Asia and Africa and elsewhere have to resort to guerrilla warfare to protect themselves or to gain their freedom, I think that it is only a matter of intelligence to expect 22 million black people in America eventually to develop the same strategy and the same tactics.
We've never all believed one thing. We've always had a diversity of opinions, and that's a strength, not a weakness. Margaret Washington and the great crusading journalist Ida B. Wells Barnett didn't agree about the best path forward for African Americans at the end of the 19th century. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had clashing ideas about what direction the black community should pursue in the beginning of the 20th century. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King saw the question of integration in starkly different terms. Those conflicts, the reason that we talk about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois more than a century after that conflict, is that it's instructive. There's always been this spectrum of opinion and this diversity of thought, and we can find representations of that now. There are black conservative thinkers, black radical thinkers, black liberal and progressive thinkers. There are people who don't fit neatly in any part of the political spectrum. There are people who believe devoutly in integration. There are people who don't think that integration offers any hope of bettering the African American community's concerns. Really, it's the vitality and distinction. Our best moments have come when we've been engaged in the most pitched battles about what the correct way forward will be.
I describe my way of thinking as heterodox because I think that we are taught that as informed black people, our most important job is to identify the role that racism plays in society. I don't like it. To me, it feels undignified. I'm embarrassed to join that. And that is why I am a quote-unquote heterodox black thinker. I love black people very much, and I want us to talk about what we can do, despite the fact that the world is not and never will be, because it never has been, anything close to perfect. Here's how I became strange. Here's how I became heterodox. I was born in 1965. My mother taught social work. She taught a course that was literally called Racism 101. I was steeped in the gospel, which is true, about what has been done to black people in this country. By 1990, 1991, I was 25-ish years old. Then what tipped me, what made me realize that there was something wrong with me, was the Rodney King verdict.
Good evening, Dan Rather reporting. A stunning verdict from Southern California. The jury in the Los Angeles police brutality trial has just reached its verdicts this evening. The 4 police officers who were videotaped repeatedly beating an unarmed man were found not guilty on all but one count. The all-white jury deadlocked on that one charge. No verdict for the one charge only.
The Rodney King verdict was egregious in exonerating those officers in terms of what they did to that man. That was clear to me. But I found that I was supposed to feel that he was a stand-in basically for me, that it wasn't just that there was a problem with the police and black people, which is an important but rather local thing and hardly the totality of the black experience. I was supposed to think that, as one black friend of mine put it at the time, a black person can't get justice in this country.
What's happened to the black people in this community and the various other minorities in this community are always getting the short end of the deal. And I think this is basically an end result of it.
I was supposed to feel that nothing significant had really happened since the mid-'60s. That bothered me because I knew that there had been a Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was historically unprecedented in the history of humankind. And then there had been the Voting Rights Act, and it's easy to forget how really difficult it was to make that happen. So that had happened. And then you don't even need to get into the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which is the third thing that eliminates, at least formally, redlining. That stuff was big, and people died to make it happen. You know, there's a tendency in how we are taught to think about ourselves in academic settings, where there's a tacit idea that what the black person needs to know is thoughts from the black left. Maybe not hard left, but black liberals too, and that's the real thing. There's a long tradition of black conservative thought that tends to get pushed aside out of a tacit sense that that's somehow wrong because white racism exists. And I think that that's simplistic. Booker T. Washington was not a scholar. He wrote some very interesting things, but the idea here is not that that should be the center of it. But there are things that, say, George Schuyler had to say that all of us could benefit from listening to. He went, even I would say, there are times he kind of went overboard. I think he kind of enjoyed making people jump. But he had a lot of really interesting things to say. We're not supposed to read him. I'm not sure that makes sense. And then talk about it's not your grandfather's black heterodoxy anymore. There now is beginning to be one, as in the days of Thomas Sowell, Shelby Steele, Walter Williams. They are people who now did most of their work in the past. And the truth is, their work should be considered central reading if you're trying to come to a decision about, quote unquote, what black people should do now. And so, for example, Sowell has written several books that are just truth incarnate about affirmative action, about education. You can't say that the things that he says don't make sense because racism exists. He just makes sense. Unfortunately, Sowell, I think, for one thing, like many people who have 400 IQs, he wasn't interested in being a media person that much. He wanted to sit and write his books. But really, my guiding star is Shelby Steele. Shelby Steele wrote this, outright black conservative take on black issues, The Content of Our Character, 1990. And it was reviewed. It actually got the National Book Award, which would never happen now. But I read it and I thought, oh my God, this is a black person of authority who's thinking like me. I guess I'm not that strange, because back then I thought I was strange. And not that I'm not strange now, but I thought he's making sense. And I shared it with people and found that most black people I knew didn't want that. They didn't like his ideas. Many people anticipated me. They said, him, this guy who thinks that black people's problems are because of black people themselves, just kind of a boil down of what they thought he was saying. And that is some of what he was saying, but you have to figure out why he was saying black people were exhibiting these problems. But I thought that The Content of Our Character was a work of genius. And if he hadn't written it, I probably would not be talking to you right now. I would be a linguist working on verbs of something, probably be still out at Berkeley, this aging, hopefully full professor. But no, he actually inspired me to stake my ground. And Shelby Steele is a damn good writer. I think a lot of people don't know it because you're not supposed to read him. Instead, you're supposed to read other writers who are teaching us what the obstacles are with a certain charisma. And often they're very good writers, but that's a very defeatist message. We don't hear enough from black thought like that, out of a sense that if it isn't all about the existence of racism, it isn't worth really thinking about. And that aspect of black academia is depressing because people end up not learning the full range. Instead, what you learn is an unspoken idea that black radicalism is the solution, that somehow that's the most interesting thing. And so you look at what the Black Panthers talked about, not what they did, but what they talked about. And you read about Amiri Baraka and their various other figures who were part of the black radical movement. The idea is this is the shit. And I get the charisma, but what precisely did that kind of blackness create for the black people on that block living their lives, doing the things they do? The black people on the block, their lives. What did that do? A lot of what black people are really living is not based on what black radicalism has suggested. It's based on the sorts of things often that people who are rejected as black conservatives have suggested. We need to talk more about that, and that's something that schools would be well placed to begin. I don't have much hope for that these days, but it's the way things should be.
Black people, like any other people, have a variety of different political and ideological perspectives in our history, past, present, and it will be the case in our future. We all have blind spots. We all have lenses through which we view the world that have no monopoly on truth or beauty or goodness. So as a revolutionary Christian, I don't believe revolutionary Christians have a monopoly on the way the world is. We miss out on some things. I can't conceive of myself without Malcolm X. He's a revolutionary Muslim. I can't conceive of myself without James Baldwin. He's an agnostic. I can't conceive myself without Nelson Mandela. I can't conceive myself without Ambedkar, who was Buddhist, struggling for Dalits. The variety of voices all around the country and the world have to be taken seriously, especially when you know that you are fallible, you are finite, and you are fallen, and therefore you got something to learn. So I can read as widely as I can. I can learn and listen to my indigenous brothers and sisters, many of whom, when they hear the word Christianity, they look for a weapon because Christianity subordinated them, abused them, mistreated them, was a rationalization of genocidal attacks on them. And I understand that, even as a Christian, you see. And you could imagine the variety of the other voices. Sister Bell Hooks, what a towering figure she is. She's Buddhist now. I got to listen to the Buddhist traditions, including Bell Hooks, including Charles Johnson, the great novelist and so forth. I think all of us want to recognize that we have got something to learn from other people who disagree with us. It's not just a matter of I got a conservative friend, I got a non-Christian or a non-Islam or an atheistic partner. No, they got something to say. They've got something to teach us. And yet, in the end, you're going to have to take your stand in terms of which traditions and which aspects of those traditions you're going to try to live out. And so I always had to be honest in terms of what is inside my heart, mind, soul, and my own skin. Brother West, where do you stand in terms of the various traditions that you're a part of? Well, it is to be a Jesus-loving, free black man who learns and listens from others, who tries to write, bear witness, sacrifice, go to jail, willing to die, put on cemetery clothes every day, coffin ready, but still got a smile on my face and still trying to preserve the style that I got from Irene and Clifton and Cynthia and Cheryl and Shiloh Baptist Church and Reverend Willie P. Cook and Deacon Hinton and Sarah Ray. That's what keeps me going.